Charleston, South Carolina, had always felt like a city divided against itself. Its graceful architecture and cobblestone streets whispered of elegance, but beneath the charm lay tension, old, unresolved, and rotting beneath the surface. The sun had barely crested the Atlantic when Judge Clara May arrived at the courthouse. At 62, she carried herself with a calm authority that needed no explanation. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a tight bun, her sharp brown eyes missing nothing, especially not the quiet slights people assumed she wouldn't notice. The courthouse, towering and cold with its neoclassical columns, had witnessed centuries of both justice and injustice. Clara had walked its marble halls for over 3 decades, first as a defense attorney, fighting uphill battles for those too often criminalized for being black and poor, then as a prosecutor, determined to root out corruption from within, and now, as a judge, the first black woman to preside over Charleston's highest court, a presence that some still refused to accept. She knew the price of breaking ceilings. The backlash wasn't always loud. Sometimes they just pretended she didn't exist. As she stepped through security, guards greeted her with respectful nods. Clara returned them with a curt dip of her head, her mind already on the docket. It was supposed to be a routine hearing. Vandalism, juvenile defendant, bond review. But something in her gut told her this day would be anything but ordinary. Outside her courtroom, her clerk met her with a strained smile. "Good morning, Judge May?" Officer Boone's already inside. "Boone?" Clara stopped mid-step. "Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Travis Boone, arresting officer in the Jameson case. He's been insistent." Clara's jaw tightened. Everyone in Charleston law enforcement knew Boone. Clean-cut, mid-40s, a third-generation cop. He wore entitlement like a badge, a legacy protected by favors and silence. Complaints about him never seemed to stick. Excessive force, misconduct, harassment, swept under the rug like dust beneath marble. She had seen his name too many times in reports soaked in arrogance. Clara entered the courtroom without her robe and without announcement. Boone was already at the prosecution table, arms folded, face sour. The teenager he'd arrested, no older than 16, sat with his public defender, eyes wide and frightened. Boone didn't look her way. "Let's get this started," he barked toward the clerk. "I don't have all day." Clara stood tall behind the bench. She glanced at the bailiff again. "Officer Mills, place Sergeant Boone under temporary detainment. No cuffs. He is still a sworn officer, but he is not to leave this room." Boone's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." Clara's voice dropped to a cold whisper. "And yet, you knew enough to hit me." He looked around, searching for backup, but the courtroom was silent. No allies, no defense, only the weight of the moment closing in. Officer Mills moved toward him, one hand lightly touching his belt. Not as a threat, but as a warning. Boone stood frozen, jaw clenched, fists tight. His face was flushed red, but his power was gone. Clara didn't look away. "Sergeant Boone, is this what justice looks like to you? A badge, a history, and impunity?" He said nothing. From the gallery, the prosecutor assigned to the vandalism case cleared his throat. "Judge May, do you want to proceed with the docket?" Clara turned her gaze to him. "I will decide that momentarily. But first," she faced the gallery, the attorneys, the reporters, the onlookers. "What happened here today is no longer a matter of courtroom decorum. It is a matter of law, of precedent, and of public trust." She looked at the journalists. You witnessed it. You heard his words. You saw his posture. Record that. Remember it. Because if the law cannot protect the people who enforce it fairly, then we are no longer a democracy. We are something much darker." Boone let out a bitter scoff. "You're turning this into a press stunt." Clara turned back to him, her expression like steel. "Is that what you think this is? Accountability? A performance?" She stepped from the bench and descended the stairs, heels striking like a ticking clock. "You've been protected for a long time, haven't you?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I've seen officers like you walk into this courtroom assuming everyone is beneath them. I've heard I didn't know when what they meant was, I didn't care." He looked toward the bailiff again, but no one moved. "Let me be clear," Clara continued. "Internal Affairs will be notified. I will personally file a formal complaint with the Attorney General. The footage will be sealed for legal review, but the press already has what they need to make headlines by lunch." "You're destroying my life over a mistake," Boone yelled. "No, you made the mistake. I'm making sure it's no longer ignored." He glanced at the teenage defendant. The boy was watching him, not in fear, but with something Boone didn't recognize: pity. "I've served this city for 20 years, Boone pleaded. "I've risked my life." "And today," Clara said, climbing the steps back to the bench, "you are being handed over to the very law you've hidden behind for decades." She sat, her robe folding around her like armor. She tapped the mic. "This courtroom is not adjourned, but the arraignment of the defendant in the vandalism case will be rescheduled for tomorrow. The arresting officer has compromised the integrity of the hearing." She looked to the teen's public defender. "Take your client out through the west exit. Escort him safely." The boy stood. He glanced once more at Boone before leaving. His posture was different now, less afraid, more aware. Boone sat silent. His eyes no longer burned with certainty. They darted, calculating. Clara leaned into the mic again. "Officer Mills, escort Sergeant Boone to Holding Room B. I will contact Internal Affairs and the Chief of Police directly." "This is no longer internal. It is criminal." Mills obeyed. As Boone was guided toward the exit, he muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "You think you've won?" Clara didn't flinch. She whispered back, "I think for once the right person is losing." The doors closed behind him. Clara spoke evenly. "Then I suggest you make time." He turned toward her, momentarily confused. Was she a clerk? A bailiff? She wasn't in robes. She wasn't seated on the bench. So to him she didn't matter. "You here for the defense?" he asked, smug. Clara didn't answer. She walked to a side table to review a file. The courtroom was nearly empty. A few early reporters, some attorneys, and 2 officers leaning against the back wall. Boone, clearly irritated, stormed toward her. "Hey, I'm talking to you." I said. Then it happened. The sharp, echoing crack of an open-handed slap silenced the room. Gasping, stillness. Even the overhead lights seemed to flicker. Clara didn't flinch. Her cheek burned, but she didn't touch it. She simply turned and met his eyes. Boone stepped back, not with shame, but with arrogance. "You people need to learn some respect," he muttered. Someone whispered from the gallery, "Oh my God!" Clara's eyes never left him. Not for a moment. He continued, oblivious. "I don't care who you think you are. You don't get to strut around." Clara stepped forward once. Twice. The clerk whispered behind her, She's not in her robe." But Boone didn't notice the shift in the room, the dawning realization on every face. Then Clara spoke, calmly, coldly, with an authority the robe had never needed to give her. "Is this how you treat officers of the court, Sergeant?" The blood drained from an officer's face in the back. A lawyer dropped their pen. Boone blinked. "What are you talking about?" Clara stepped onto the platform, climbed the steps, then turned to face him from behind the bench. Nobody breathed. From the judge's seat, she stared down at him. Boone's face contorted in disbelief. And then, for the first time, fear. Clara clasped her hands. "Sergeant Boone," she said, voice slicing through the air like a blade, "did you just strike me in this courtroom?" He fumbled, already defensive. I didn't know who you were." "That's not what I asked," she interrupted. "Did you put your hand on me? Yes or no?" Cameras had come out. Phones were recording. This was no longer misconduct. It was evidence. Boone raised his voice, trying to seize control. "You came at me. I didn't recognize you. You weren't in your robe." "You thought I was beneath you," Clara said. The words landed hard. His jaw clenched. "You assaulted a woman, unprovoked, in a courtroom. Your only defense is ignorance and arrogance." "I was doing my job," he snapped. "That kid," he pointed toward the defendant, "is a thug." "Enough!" Her voice thundered. The gavel slammed. Once. Twice. "You do not justify assault by pointing at a teenager." She turned to the clerk. Ms. Harper, please enter into the record that Officer Travis Boone has admitted on the record to striking a sitting judge in a courtroom without cause. Boone paled. He looked around. The officers in the back refused to meet his eyes. She glanced at the bailiff. Officer Mills, is this courtroom under video surveillance? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Let the record also reflect visual evidence is available. Boone stared at the blinking red lights in the corners of the ceiling. Now he was scared. You've had 20 years of not meaning it, Clara said. I've seen your file. I've seen the complaints. The ones that disappear. But today, this happened under cameras, in front of witnesses. To a judge. He tried again. You're destroying my life over a misunderstanding. No, Sergeant. You destroyed your career the moment your hand struck my face. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with tension. Word had already spread. A judge had been assaulted. Not just any judge, Clara May. And not just any officer, Travis Boone. By the time Clara reached her chambers, 2 voicemails were waiting. One from the Chief of Police's office, another from Internal Affairs. She didn't press play. Instead, she hung her robe carefully, methodically, on its hook by the door. Her fingers brushed the fabric where the slap had landed. The sting had faded, but the memory was sharp. She stared into the mirror, examining the faint red mark on her cheek. Not because it hurt, but because she wanted to remember how many people had walked out of her courtroom with worse on their skin, on their dignity, and never got a moment like this. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Carter Lang, her bailiff of nearly a decade. Broad-shouldered, stone-faced, loyal without hesitation. They've moved him to Holding Room B, he said quietly. Internal Affairs is on their way. 20 minutes out. Clara nodded. He hesitated. Judge, word is Boone's union already made a call. They're moving fast. Of course they are, Clara said. But they're too late. She sat at her desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Her handwriting was steady and sharp as she wrote, Incident. Courtroom assault. Status. On record. Witnesses present. Cameras. Active. Officer's record. 5 prior complaints. Last 7 years. Connections. ADA Ramsey. Dismissed excessive force complaints. Judge notes, request review of dismissed cases. Carter watched in silence as she wrote. I want every case Boone was the lead officer or testified in pulled and flagged, she said. That's going to be a mountain. Clara looked up. Then we better start climbing. Carter nodded once, already turning to get to work. But as he reached the door, Clara spoke again. Softer this time. They think this is about a slap. Carter paused. They don't realize, she said. They just opened the door we've been pounding on for years. 30 minutes later, 2 Internal Affairs agents arrived. One was a no-nonsense black woman named Agent Rosalind Keene. The other, a sharp-eyed Latino man named Felix Reyes. Clara had met Keene before. A quiet force with a reputation for cutting through corruption, not covering it up. They sat across from her at the conference table. Keene opened a thick folder already labeled Boone Travis. We've had eyes on him for a while, Keene admitted, but his record was always just clean enough. Complaints would vanish. Evidence would fail to materialize. Too many coincidences. Clara nodded grimly. Coincidence should be a felony. Reyes leaned forward. We've already pulled the surveillance from the courtroom. Audio and video. It's backed up. Confirmed the strike, the statements, and your response. You had multiple witnesses. Cameras active. The record is solid. Clara nodded once. I don't just want accountability. I want the foundation cracked wide open. Keene studied her carefully. Judge May, how far are you willing to go with this? Clara didn't hesitate. All the way. Reyes reached into his bag and pulled out a thumb drive. He slotted it into his tablet and turned the screen toward her. A report. Dated 2019. An anonymous civilian complaint. The allegation. Boone had brutally assaulted a 17-year-old boy during an arrest, doctored the body cam footage, and the original video had mysteriously disappeared. The case was quietly closed due to insufficient evidence. Clara scrolled down. Internal reviewer, Detective M. Whitaker. Her heart skipped. As in, Captain Whitaker, she asked? Boone's former training officer? Retired last year, Reyes confirmed, but his command staff is still in place. Keene tapped another file open. We found 3 more like that. Same patterns, same handling, and one name keeps showing up alongside Boone's in the prosecution files. She flipped the screen again. ADA Carson E. Ramsey. Clara sat back in her chair. Ramsey? She'd seen him 100 times in her courtroom. Always confident, always accommodating to police. Too many times she'd seen him offer plea deals that didn't make sense. Too many times she'd felt something off. He sat on half of Boone's major cases, Clara muttered. And I remember, after one shaky testimony, he patted Boone on the back. This isn't just about one violent officer, Reyes said. It's a network. Clara leaned forward, her voice turning cold and clear. Then I want a list. Every case Boone touched, every complaint buried, every prosecutor who helped make it disappear. She met their eyes. And I want it on my desk by sunrise. Reyes raised an eyebrow. That'll take all night. Then don't stop working. Keene smiled faintly. Judge, I think we're going to get along just fine. By 6 a.m., the courthouse was barely awake. The halls echoed with nothing but the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the slow shuffle of janitors. But in Judge Clara May's chambers, no one had slept. Files were open. Documents flagged. Reyes and Keene were cross-referencing sealed complaints. Carter had just returned with coffee, placing a cup silently on Clara's desk before settling in a corner, flipping through a folder thick enough to choke a printer. How bad is it? He finally asked. Clara didn't look up. Her pen kept moving. 19 complaints, all involving Boone. 12 against officers under his supervision. 4 prosecutors who refused to press charges despite clear evidence. 2 missing body cam files. Multiple suspicious plea deals. And no discipline. Carter let out a long breath. That's not a bad apple. That's a rotting orchard. Clara's eyes lifted. Cold. Focused. And it's been protected. Systematically. Before Carter could respond, the office phone rang. She picked it up. Judge May? A familiar voice replied. Calm, male, calculated. Clara, it's Chief Nolan. I was expecting your call, she said flatly, though not this early. You've seen the footage, I assume, he said. I lived it. I'm not calling to defend Boone, he added quickly. No, Clara said. You're calling to control the explosion. Nolan didn't deny it. Clara, you need to understand. This isn't about one officer losing his temper. You're pulling on a thread that could unravel this whole department. That's the idea, she said. I'm not your enemy. Silence is complicity, Chief. A pause. I've got the union breathing down my neck. The mayor wants answers. And I hear you've gone to Internal Affairs directly? Because your department didn't. I'm not escalating. I'm revealing. There was another pause. Then a shift in tone. Less diplomatic. Sharper. Look, Nolan said, you want Boone to face charges? Fine. I'll support it. But if you keep dragging in commanders, prosecutors, retired leadership, you're going to tear this place apart. We won't be able to clean it up. Clara's voice didn't waver. Then maybe it's time we stopped cleaning and started rebuilding. The line went dead. She stared at the receiver for a long moment before gently placing it back. Carter raised an eyebrow. That sounded like a threat disguised as advice. She nodded. He's scared. Good. Just then, Keene walked in, face grim, holding a slim red folder. We found something you need to see. She opened it. A transcript. Surveillance audio. Locker room chatter. Dated 2 years ago. Boone's voice. Laughing. You ever see her up close? That judge, Clara, walks around like she owns the courthouse. Thinks the robe makes her bulletproof. A second voice, still unidentified. She ever come after you? Let her try. I've got friends higher than her. One complaint and poof. Activist judge out the door. Clara's stomach turned. Who else heard this? We just found it buried in another investigation's backlog, Keene said. The second voice, we think it's Ada Ramsey. Clara's pulse ticked. Can you confirm? We're running voice recognition now. There's more, Keene added. She handed over a document, a list of recent internal meetings. There was an emergency session at the DA's office last night. They're trying to pull the Boone case from your bench, claiming you're compromised, too close to the incident. They want to remove me. If they succeed, he walks on a lesser charge. They'll bury it. Clara stood, jaw tight. She checked the wall clock, 7:02 a.m. I want a public hearing, she said. Let the record show I requested the transfer. Not because I'm compromised, but because I refuse to let this go quietly. Keene raised an eyebrow. You're going on the offensive? Clara turned to her. No, I'm going nuclear. Outside her chambers, the courthouse was waking up. Phones were ringing. Reporters were gathering. Someone was watching from across the street. A black SUV parked too long, its windows tinted too dark. Someone was already coming for her. But Clara May was done playing by the rules. By 9 a.m., the courthouse felt like a pressure cooker. Reporters lined the halls. Clerks whispered in doorways. Attorneys avoided eye contact, sensing something seismic was about to happen. Judge Clara May walked into the main courtroom, not in her robe, not to preside. Today, she stood not as the bench, but as the fire. Behind her stood her bailiff, Carter Lang, and Internal Affairs agent Rosalind Keene. In front of her sat ADA Carson Ramsey, stone-faced, and beside him, a sharp-featured man in a tailored gray suit. His name tag read Elliot Parrish, representative of the State Ethics Board. His posture screamed damage control. Judge May, he said with a lawyer's smile, we've received your request for a public hearing regarding your recusal. I'm here to record the motion and clarify intent. Clara didn't sit. I've reviewed the arguments submitted by the DA's office, she said clearly, addressing the press behind them. They claim I'm emotionally compromised, unable to preside fairly due to the incident with Officer Boone. Ramsey remained still. Clara continued. Let me be perfectly clear. I am stepping down from the Boone arraignment, not because I am compromised, but because I refuse to let this case be diluted behind closed doors. Murmurs moved through the courtroom. I am requesting that this case be elevated to special review status and that an independent federal monitor be assigned to investigate all prior cases involving Sergeant Boone and his direct collaborators. Parrish's expression shifted. Ramsey leaned forward. Judge, with respect, this forum is not intended for conspiracy allegations. I'm not alleging, Clara replied. I'm exposing. She handed a file to Keene, who opened it and placed it between them on the table. Let the record reflect. 3 civilian complaints, 5 sealed memos, 2 missing body cam logs, and a 2018 juvenile court transcript, all linked to Sergeant Boone. Each one, she said, turning to the gallery, contains your signature, Mr. Ramsey. The room went still. You declined to prosecute Boone in 5 separate cases, despite documentation of excessive force and contradictory sworn testimony. In each of those cases, the defense, often black teenagers, were pressured into plea deals, some without full legal counsel. Ramsey said nothing. His face drained of color. Keene added a second file. Well, this is a financial record, Mr. Parrish, she said calmly, addressing the ethics board rep. It shows a $15,000 donation made to the State Judicial Endowment from an organization tied to the Charleston Police Benevolent Fund. The money was supposed to fund scholarships. Half was redirected into a legal defense fund used by Officer Boone last year. Parrish shifted in his chair. That isn't relevant to... It is if that fund was used to shield an abusive officer, Clara said. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. She looked directly at Ramsey. Tell me, who protected Boone when the body cam footage disappeared in 2019? The one that left a 17-year-old boy in the hospital. Ramsey opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence. Keene slid forward a slip of paper. We traced the footage, she said. It wasn't lost. It was moved, redirected to a private server owned by a security firm based in Atlanta. That firm is on retainer with the Charleston mayor's office. Clara raised an eyebrow. And who approved that contract? Another silence. Keene delivered the final blow. You did. The courtroom exploded. Cameras flashed. Reporters stood. Ramsey shoved back from the table. This is character assassination, he shouted. No, Clara said calmly. This is exposure, and it's long overdue. Parrish rose, visibly shaken. We'll need time to process this. You'll have it, Clara said, but let the record reflect. I am recusing myself not because of pressure, not because of intimidation, but because I refuse to be silenced. She turned to the cameras. This city has protected a structure of unchecked power for too long. Today is not about a slap. It's about what that slap revealed. A system built on fear, silence, and loyalty to everything but justice. She faced Ramsey again. And those layers are crumbling. Ramsey left the courtroom in a blur of phone calls and sweat. Parrish followed close behind. Clara remained standing. Keene whispered beside her, "They'll come after you." Clara didn't blink. They already have. Just then her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Text message, "You need to stop." 5 words. No name. No threat. Just a warning sharp enough to draw blood. She showed it to Keene. Keene read it, then said, "Good. That means we're hitting nerves." The moment Clara returned to her chambers, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. One new message. "Nice house in Mount Pleasant. Does your nephew still bike home alone from school?" She froze. Her fingers went cold around the phone. The letters blurred, but the threat was unmistakably sharp. She locked the door. Carter looked up instantly. "What's wrong?" She handed him the phone. He read it. His face darkened. "That son of a—" "Don't!" Clara cut him off. We don't say his name unless we're writing it into the record." She walked to the window, staring through the blinds. Somewhere out there, someone was trying to remind her of the old rules. The ones meant to keep people like her quiet, or punish them for speaking. "I want a name," she said. Whoever sent that message." "I'll get it," Carter said without hesitation. "And Carter, pull my nephew from school. Quietly. Assign someone we trust to watch my sister's house." He nodded once and began dialing. That night, Travis Boone was moved. Unofficially, silently, and without paperwork. Not released. Not transferred. Just relocated. Smuggled like contraband through precinct corridors. He was handed a burner phone, an unregistered vehicle, and a name. Clara May. The man from before, the one in the gray suit, cold and nameless, leaned into the car window before Boone left. "One warning," he said. Clean. Subtle. "You don't touch her. You don't even go near her. You just remind her." Boone gritted his teeth. "You want me to threaten a judge?" The man didn't blink. "We want you to warn her. She's too bold. She needs to remember where power really comes from. Not robes. Not courtrooms. Fear." Boone stared at him. This wasn't a rescue. It was a dare. "If I do this," Boone said, "what do I get?" "A lifeline," the man replied. "No federal prison. No indictment. Just a quiet job in private security. Out of the spotlight. Good pay. No questions." He tapped the hood of the car. "Or," he said with a faint smile, "you rot." Then he walked away. Boone sat there for a long moment. Then he drove into the Charleston night. The next morning, a package arrived at the courthouse. No label. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Her nephew, 2 days earlier, riding his bike home from school. On the back, scrawled in jagged block letters, "Stay in your lane." Clara stood motionless. Then she picked up her office phone. "Get me the U.S. Marshals?" She didn't shout. She didn't panic. But someone had just knocked on the wrong door, and they were about to find out what it looked like when a judge stopped playing by the rules and started writing new ones. The federal building in downtown Charleston looked like a fortress, bland, windowless, and built for silence. That morning, Clara sat across from 3 U.S. Marshals and 2 DOJ officials. She slid the photo across the table. "My nephew," she said, "taken without his knowledge. Sent to me. No threat written, but it doesn't have to be." "Are you certain Boone's behind this?" One of the marshals, A gray-haired man named Mercer asked. I'm certain it came from someone acting on his behalf, Clara said. Boone doesn't send messages unless he's told to. What exactly are you asking us for? Clara folded her hands. Full protection for my family. Federal custody for Boone by the end of today. And an emergency judicial order freezing every case tied to his testimony, pending independent review. One DOJ official, a woman named Frances Kwan, raised an eyebrow. That's going to shake Charleston's courts for months. Then let them shake, Clara said. No one argued. Within the hour, a team of marshals was en route to Boone's last known location. Clara returned to the courthouse, not as a judge, as a force. Keene met her in the corridor outside the district records room, a folder already in hand. We traced the burner phone, Keene said. Boone used it twice last night. One of the calls went to a number registered under a shell company in Atlanta. That company shares office space with a lobbying firm tied to the mayor's re-election campaign. Clara exhaled sharply. So the rot goes beyond the courts. Keene nodded. Way beyond, Clara's voice dropped. Didn't you say that shell company was flagged before? Twice, Keene confirmed. Once during a corruption probe 3 years ago. Buried. The second time was 6 weeks ago, a financial audit request. Filed by who? A local journalist. Julia Spence. Clara froze. She disappeared, didn't she? Keene's voice softened. 2 days later. Found in her car. Ruled overdose. Did she have a history? No, but she had a reputation for digging too deep. Clara stared down the hallway. The fury wasn't loud. It wasn't shaking. It was steady. The kind that plans. Find me everything she was working on, Clara said. Every note, every file, every source. If there's a thread, she added, we're going to pull it out of the wall. Keene hesitated. Judge, this could go far beyond Boone. I'm counting on it, Clara said. Across the city, Travis Boone gripped the steering wheel of his borrowed sedan. His knuckles were white. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. His phone buzzed again. Another message, another order, another voice reminding him of who owned him now. He was running out of time. He thought the photograph would rattle Clara. Remind her that she didn't belong in this war, that she had stepped too far. But all he'd done was awaken something in her. And now he was the one being hunted. He pulled into a parking garage downtown, half empty, silent, echoing. From the trunk, he grabbed a duffel bag. Cash. A second burner phone. A Glock. He wasn't going down easy. He made it 10 steps toward the stairwell before he heard it. A voice, calm and precise. Sergeant Boone. He spun. Gun halfway drawn. 4 U.S. Marshals stepped from the shadows, weapons already raised. Put it down, Boone. He froze. There was no bluff left. No favors to call in. No backroom deal waiting. He dropped the bag. Then the gun. Then his knees hit the concrete. Slow, final, hollow. Back at the courthouse, Clara received the alert at 3:14 p.m. Boone, federal custody, unarmed, arrested without incident. She didn't smile. There was no victory here, only confirmation. She was already in a closed-door meeting with Keene, Carter, and DOJ Rep. Frances Kwan, who had returned with backup and a briefcase full of sealed documents. We've reopened the Julia Spence file, Kwan said. The autopsy was inconclusive, but we found signs that the coroner's report was altered. By who? Logan credentials were deleted, but the access came from an internal system. The last user ID? Gone. Erased like it was never there. Clara's voice was quiet. Someone's been erasing the truth like it's written in pencil. Not anymore, Kwan said. She laid out the next phase. A joint task force, internal affairs, federal investigators, and an external judicial review board. Boone's not talking yet, Keene said. But he will. Clara looked down at the files spread across her desk. Names, patterns, case numbers, testimonies, a map of injustice, a blueprint of decay, and now, finally, a trail to follow. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the courthouse steps in gold. There were people down there. Reporters, protesters, survivors. Some held signs with Boone's name. Others held pictures of loved ones whose cases had been buried in silence. Carter stepped beside her. Quiet. Solid. You did it, he said softly. No, Clara replied. I just turned on the light. The roaches ran themselves. Carter gave her a faint smile. What now? Clara exhaled. Now we see how deep the tunnel goes. Across town, Boone sat alone in a federal holding cell. The walls were cold. Concrete. Tight. No badge. No uniform. No protection. Just him. And the reality that the world outside had moved on without him. He stared at his hands. Hands that used to command fear. Hands that now trembled. The guards outside said nothing. No greetings. No respect. No more nods. Not even here. He was already forgotten. Then, a click. The cell door opened. A man entered. Gray suit. Same as before. He didn't introduce himself. Just dropped a file on the bench. Your lifeline, he said. Or your anchor. Boone narrowed his eyes. I don't do cryptic. Then I'll be clear. The man didn't sit. I represent people who are concerned with what Judge May is stirring up. You've been useful. But now you're a liability. Boone bristled. I gave everything to that department. And that's why they haven't buried you yet. But understand this. If you let her control the story, we won't protect you. Boone stood. Then what do you want? Remind her, the man said, who holds the leash. He opened the folder. Inside were photos of Clara, her home, her late husband, even one of her sister's house. Surveillance? Boone muttered. Leverage, the man corrected. You don't need to touch her. You just need to make her feel touched. Boone looked away. You're insane. The man smiled slightly. You used to be good at this. Now prove you're still useful. Then he walked out, leaving the door open just long enough to let Boone know what his options were. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 9:30, the front steps of the Charleston courthouse were packed. Local reporters, national networks, legal observers, protesters, survivors of police brutality. Some held signs reading, Justice for all, or Justice for none. Inside, behind the courthouse windows, Judge Clara May stood watching. She wasn't wearing her robe. She wore black, a fitted blazer over a dark blouse. No bench today, no gavel, only truth. They've moved Boone to a secure federal facility, Keene said, approaching from behind. And he's talking. Clara turned slightly. How many names? Keene handed her a sheet. 12, she said. 7 police officers, 2 prosecutors, 1 retired captain, 1 sitting city council member, and Keene hesitated. Clara read the last name. Judge Benjamin Halcraft. Her heart skipped. Her mentor, the man who had once called her the future of Charleston law, the man who swore her in. No, she whispered. Ben! Carter stepped beside her, reading over her shoulder. That man gave you your first clerkship. Keene was steady but respectful. He also signed off on at least 3 questionable case dismissals tied to Boone. One of them involved a civil rights claim that vanished before the hearing. Clara's fists clenched. This goes deeper than misconduct, she said. This is institutional, judicial, generational. Keene nodded. It survives because it silences. Clara looked at them both. Then we make noise. Outside, the crowd fell silent as Clara stepped to the podium. Camera lights flared. Microphones clicked on. She took a breath. I became a judge because I believed in the promise of justice, she began. But promises mean nothing if they are not kept. She held up a folder. This document contains the names of 12 individuals who, over the past decade, colluded to shield each other while abusing their authority. Some are officers. Some are attorneys. One is a sitting judge, gasps. She didn't flinch. These names have been submitted to federal investigators. I will not read them aloud today, not because I fear backlash, but because I believe in due process, something many of them denied to others. She looked directly at the press. This is not about a slap. This is about what that slap revealed. A system that rewards silence, that protects power, that punishes truth. Someone in the back shouted, "We believe you, Judge May." Applause followed. Hesitant at first, then growing. Carter stood nearby, silent but proud. Keene stood closer to the crowd, not watching the cameras but the rooftops, because Clara had just painted a target on her back, and someone, somewhere, was already taking aim. That evening, as the courthouse emptied and the city calmed, Clara returned to her chambers. Her phone buzzed. Voicemail. No caller ID. She pressed play. A voice she hadn't heard in years. Cold. Measured. Precise. Clara, by now you've seen my name. You're angry. I understand. But some structures survive because they must. You take us all down. You take down the last piece of order Charleston has left. You don't want chaos, Clara. You don't want blood. Walk away while you still can. Or you won't just lose your seat. You'll lose everything. Click. The silence after was louder than the threat. Carter walked in seconds later. There was a black SUV outside. Loading dock. No plates. Clara looked at him. Halcraft just called me. His jaw tightened. Was it a threat? No. It was a warning. Which is worse? You backing down? Clara met his eyes. Not a chance. By midnight it began. The first smear article hit a fringe news blog. Judge Clara May accused of misconduct in 2009 case. No evidence. No sources. Just rumors. Then came the bots. Social media flooded with hashtags. Charles, activist judge, May must resign. Radical robe. Within hours, reporters received anonymous tips that Clara had ties to radical organizations, that she'd marched in protests, that her courtroom history was biased. A photo appeared. Clara in college, fist raised at a student rally. The caption twisted it into something dark. Even her nephew's school got a call from a concerned parent asking if the boy was being indoctrinated. They weren't just coming for her name. They were coming for her bloodline. Clara sat in the dark, watching it unfold. They're trying to erase everything, Carter said quietly. Your reputation. Your work. You, she nodded. Then we changed the rules. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a slim black binder. Carter took it. What is this? Everything I've never said out loud. About Halcraft. About cases that never sat right. About things whispered behind country club doors. He flipped through the pages. His face changed. This is a kill switch. I'm not trying to survive anymore, Clara said softly. I'm making sure they can never hide again. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston was standing room only. Cameras lined the halls. Protesters and supporters packed the plaza. U.S. Marshals formed a perimeter. Inside, the air was thick with something heavier than anticipation. History. Judge Clara May sat in the front row. Not on the bench, not behind the gavel. As a citizen, as a witness, as a survivor of the very system she once swore to uphold. The charges: assault of a federal judge, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to suppress evidence, witness intimidation, perjury, 5 felony counts. But Boone wasn't the only name under indictment. Behind closed doors, Adia Carson Ramsey had resigned and was negotiating a plea. Judge Benjamin Halcraft had been suspended. 2 precinct captains were fired. 3 officers had turned state's evidence. And the nameless handler who had brokered Boone's threats? Gone. The web had begun to unravel, and Clara May had lit the match. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, the state calls Judge Clara May to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. She stood, walked calmly toward the witness box, took her oath, sat, composed, unshaken. The prosecutor approached. Judge May, what happened on the morning of April 11th? Her voice rang out, not loud, but anchored. I was struck in the face by a man who believed I didn't belong. What did that moment mean to you? Clara paused. It meant the system I had dedicated my life to had ceased to protect those who served it with integrity. That law had become negotiable. That truth had become optional. That respect was conditional. She looked directly at the jury. But it also meant something else, that silence could no longer protect us. That if I didn't stand, others would stay down. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Boone's attorney stood. Young, nervous, overmatched. He tried. Judge May, do you believe you are above the law? Clara looked at him like a professor watching a student miss the point. No, she said. I believe I'm beneath it, like everyone else. That's the point. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the gallery. The judge banged the gavel once, but even he was smiling. The defense attorney tried again. Do you admit you brought personal bias into this investigation? I brought truth, Clara said. And if that truth is uncomfortable, that's not bias. That's justice doing its job. Boone watched her from across the room. Not with anger, with defeat. 2 days later, the verdict came in. Guilty, on all counts. Sentencing would follow. But Boone was no longer the headline. The ripple effect had become a wave. 1 week later, a statewide investigation was launched into judicial misconduct. Over 140 past convictions were flagged for review. A new Civil Rights Commission began auditing officer complaint procedures. The Charleston Police Department was placed under full federal oversight, and the governor, pressured by bipartisan outrage, called for sweeping reform. It was a rainy Thursday when Clara returned to the courtroom where it all began. She stood alone. No press, no crowd, just her reflection in the polished wood of the bench. Carter entered, shaking the rain from his coat. They want to name the judicial conference room after you. Clara raised an eyebrow. I'm not dead, he chuckled. Not yet. She smiled faintly, then turned serious. Do you think the reforms will stick? He shrugged. Some will. Others will take time. Clara nodded. That's what they don't tell you about justice. It's not a moment. It's erosion and rebuilding. You sure you want to do this? He asked. I have to. That afternoon, she stood before the State Judiciary Review Board. Microphones clicked. Gasps filled the room as she began. I am submitting my resignation. I still believe in the law, in its power to protect and heal. But I also believe institutions must be rebuilt by new hands. I lit a fire. It is not for me to stand in its glow. A board member stood. Judge May, your actions have inspired a movement. You could lead that change. Clara smiled, sad but resolute. Change doesn't need a monument. It needs momentum. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, she said. Make sure the next woman who wears this robe doesn't have to fight this hard just to be heard. 2 months later, Clara returned to her sister's house in Mount Pleasant. The quiet was strange, not threatening, just still. The media storm had moved on. The hearings had paused. The city was rebuilding, slowly, painfully. But here, in this moment, all that mattered was the hum of wind through the trees, the ticking of the porch clock, and the sound of a bicycle rattling up the driveway. Her nephew. He dropped the bike and ran up the steps. Auntie Clara! She caught him in a hug. Strong, tight, silent. I saw you on TV, he said into her shoulder. You made them listen. She pulled back, looking him in the eyes. I made them look, she said. Listening. That's still up to them. He nodded, serious in the way only kids can be when they understand more than they should. They sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. The city still buzzed beyond the hills. But here it was calm. Clara closed her eyes and exhaled, not in surrender, in peace. This is not just a courtroom drama. It's a mirror, held up to a system, to a country, to power, and the people it believes it owns. When racist officers struck a black woman in court, they thought they were silencing another voice. They didn't know she was a judge. They didn't know she was the system's reckoning. They didn't know she had spent her entire life watching injustice wear a badge and was no longer willing to let it hide. Judge Clara May is not fiction. She is every black woman who has carried the weight of truth into rooms not meant to hold it. She is every voice told to sit down who stood. Every truth told to whisper that roared. She didn't rise through vengeance. She rose through justice. And in doing so, she reminded us all, systems are made of people, and people can be changed, especially by those who have lived long enough to know what's worth burning down and what's worth building back up. This is Stories of Black Pain, where silence is broken and justice isn't whispered. It echoes for generations.